going to have the benefit of the expert's advice here. And I know, having heard him before, I sort of know what's coming up. But I'll let Will introduce himself.
Thank you very much. So, as I said, I'll start with just a little bit about me and how I got onto this. As I go on, I'll be passing these around, just clockwise is probably best, and try not to get them mixed up with all the other teacups and saucers going on. But yes, so my name is Will, as we've mentioned. I'm an auctioneer, valuer, and I'm actually head of the interiors auctions at Duke's in Dorchester. I've been there, I think, full-time for probably over 4 years now. I work with and for my dad, who is a partner at the firm. Auction house Duke's was short of a sale room porter. I started working there 2 days a week. Sale room porter is an essential, if slightly unglamorous, part of the business. As I say, 4 years later, I've been working there full time, often overtime, in the company which I now know and love. We've been auctioneers since 1823. We had our 200-year anniversary auction last year. There are, which as we discussed works quite well for me, there are just 3 screens, microphone, and what has come through with the online platforms is essentially transparency and therefore increased competition. Moreover, the costs have increased. We have to pay a charge for everything we sell online. On the other hand, the online platforms have vastly increased our capacity for marketing and reaching new and the growing areas of our business. So the popular and kind of industry leading departments such as African and Oceanic art and Asian art, we hold specialist auctions, and these are largely run by bidders from overseas who are largely trying to buy back their culture, as it's currently resting over here in the UK. The sale I mentioned earlier kind of incorporated all of the ways that we're trying to increase those departments that are specialists, with a history that everyone can relate to. We spoke about the old Russian picture that you bought, and kind of basically people like to have a story and a connection to what they want to buy. I managed to select 5 of perhaps the most traditional and unexciting antiques there may be. However, I do have to work with somewhat what's in the building at the moment. Start with this one, which is number 1, which is 18th century Chinese tea bowl. So, as you can see, relatively insignificant in size, but several centuries old, and marked to the base. Now, the interesting thing about this is that this is actually a pseudo mark, so the marks on the bottom translate normally with Chinese reign marks to exactly the reign of that emperor. This, which is, as I say, 18th century, it says on the bottom that from the Ming dynasty, which is 13 to 1600. Now, as the theme is keeping antiques current, that is sadly worth probably under £50 by itself nowadays. The way that we can try and endeavour to keep this current is we hold our specialist Asian art auctions. I mentioned these earlier with tea bowl. This one's sadly slightly chipped and cracked. And the interesting thing about this is it has been clobbered with the kind of the famous tea clippers to kind of Europe, and tea being quite a light but expensive trade, they used porcelain, Chinese porcelain, as ballast for the ships, so they would make better speed. It would always arrive to European ports, blue and white, relatively cheap, auctioned off on the docks, and became almost a secondary trade. What the Dutch did in particular is they would take these blue and white pieces and overpaint them with kind of colourful flowers in enamelling, in the kind of Chinese typical style. That technique is now called clobbering, which is always useful, but definitely worth triple checking, as I've learnt. And this is a French porcelain beaker. I mean, if you hold them up next to each other, you'll see immediately the comparison in the actual bodies of the continental ceramic factories. Had to have basically aristocratic backing. Kind of slightly interesting, perhaps, that only really in England did we have big porcelain factories that were run by the merchant classes, and it became quite a nouveau riche sort of thing. Last two. Now this I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with at the moment, because we recently had a consignment of 10,000 pieces of porcelain, all from a single bungalow. I mean, you couldn't... If this whole room was full of tables, it would be stacked high. And I have personally catalogued and listed everything from that collection, and it was the bane of my life for several weeks. Factory called H&R Daniel, who produced porcelain for about 24 years, so it was quite short-lived. Their biggest commission was for the Earl of Shrewsbury, who at the time commissioned a service in this distinct shape. It's become known as the Shrewsbury shape. One of the challenges of our job, because that's one maker, that's one maker, they have no real marks on the bottom to signify, and we are expected to identify kind of with our knowledge which one is which. The Chinese market is an interesting one. I'm kind of fascinated by it because there is some really exciting values in it, as you will have all seen in the newspapers, pots selling for £100,000, millions of pounds, etc. But also there's a lot of murkiness. A lot of it came over to the UK when it was very highly priced here and not in China. It wasn't always legally transported over. I mean, I was talking to it. That's basically all I was going to talk about. I probably bored you enough about teacups. Just a quick point on all of this. So these are all, as I say, 18th century, 18th century, 19th century, possibly interesting, possibly bored you all to death. We sold a collection of Star Wars figures on Tuesday. A little box unboxed for £480, which is probably more than all of this. We sold Lord of the Rings cave troll that was about this high for £500. So it is a changing market, and I could have taken in some Star Wars figures, but I thought the subject of the talk was keeping antiques current. These are our antiques and what we're trying to do to kind of make the most of them.
Another 20 years and you can come along and talk about Star Wars.
Yeah. It's going that way.
If we're alive.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Will.
No problem.